Carlos Martinez, CEO of a supermarket chain valued at 800 million euros, was conducting his monthly inspection at one of his stores in the Vallecas area when he witnessed a scene that would change his life forever. A young mother, holding a baby in her arms and walking alongside a 4-year-old girl, approached the checkout with 3 items: powdered milk, diapers, and a loaf of bread. When the cashier informed her that the total was 27 euros, the woman began to count and recount the coins in her wallet. With a voice choked by embarrassment, she said, "I'm sorry, I have to return the milk." Carlos silently watched as the mother returned the tin of powdered milk while her baby cried from hunger and her daughter tugged at her skirt, asking when they would be able to eat. In that precise moment, the millionaire who had built an empire selling food to Spanish families understood a devastating truth. While he was counting his millions in profits, there were mothers who were forced to choose between feeding their children or paying rent. What he did next was not just an act of charity, but the beginning of a revolution that would transform Spain and the lives of thousands of families. But before all that, he had to face one of the darkest secrets of his success. Carlos had never stepped into one of his supermarkets as a regular customer. At 42 years old, the man who had turned a small neighborhood store into a chain of 347 establishments across Spain knew his business through quarterly reports, profit margins, and sales statistics that arrived promptly at his office in the attic of the headquarters in Madrid. That November morning, he had decided to make a surprise inspection at the Vallecas supermarket, one of the underperforming stores that he was considering closing. Dressed in his usual dark gray Armani suit with Italian shoes that cost more than the monthly salary of one of his employees, he walked through the aisles of the store, mentally noting everything that didn't meet corporate standards. His life was meticulously organized to maximize efficiency and profit. He woke up every morning at 5:30 in his 400-square-meter villa in the exclusive La Moraleja area. He worked out for 45 minutes in his private gym, read financial reports during breakfast, which was served by his domestic staff, and arrived at the office before 8 a.m. to begin his day, which rarely ended before 10 p.m. He had no family. His marriage had ended 5 years ago when his wife grew tired of being married to a man who only saw the world through numbers, billing, and annual growth. The supermarkets were meticulously designed to maximize customer spending. Essential products were placed at the back of the aisles to force customers to walk through the entire store. Special offers on impulse items and a layout designed to confuse and slow down shoppers increased the likelihood of unplanned purchases. Carlos didn't see customers as people, but as consumption units that generated valuable data to optimize income and margins. That morning, Carlos was precisely analyzing the location of the dairy section. Baby products were strategically placed next to luxury items to create a psychological contrast that pushed parents to spend more. When he noticed a scene that he initially interpreted as a simple case of customer management, a young woman, holding a baby and guiding a blonde 4-year-old girl, approached the checkout. The mother, who appeared to be no older than 25, wore a worn-out jacket that had seen better days and faded jeans. What caught Carlos's attention was not just her appearance, but the expression of determination and despair that lit up her face. The shopping cart contained only 3 items arranged with almost religious delicacy: a tin of powdered baby milk, a pack of diapers, and a loaf of wholemeal bread. Carlos automatically noted the prices. The milk cost 14 euros, the diapers 11 euros, and the bread 2 euros. As the woman stood in line, she mentally calculated the total. The cashier, a woman in her 50s whom Carlos recognized from staff photos, scanned the items with the efficiency of someone who had worked there for years. When the screen showed 27 euros, the young mother opened her worn synthetic leather wallet, so battered that the stitching marks were visible. What happened next was a scene that Carlos would replay in his mind for years. The woman began to count the coins, trembling slightly. 50 cents, 1 euro, 2 euros. She placed them on the conveyor belt again, recounted them, grouped them by value. The baby began to cry, the sharp cry of a hungry infant, as the older girl tugged at her skirt, asking in a soft voice when they would eat. Carlos, moved by an inexplicable curiosity, approached a little, hiding behind a magazine rack. He watched in fascination at this survival math that he had never seen so closely. The woman had exactly 16 euros and 30 cents in coins. She was 10 euros and 70 cents short of completing the purchase, an insignificant amount to him but completely unattainable for her. The cashier, patient and professional, waited silently. People in line began checking their watches impatiently. It was at that moment when the woman, with a broken voice, said the words Carlos would never forget. "I'm sorry, I have to return the milk." Her voice was not full of shame, but of deep resignation, as if she had hoped until the last moment to gather enough money but knew it would be impossible. She took the tin of powdered milk and handed it to the cashier, who put it aside without saying anything. The screen now displayed only 13 euros, the price of the bread and diapers. The woman began to count her money again with more certainty and paid with 3 euros in crumpled bills she took from the back pocket of her jeans. While the cashier packed the items, the baby continued crying louder, and the little girl, with a devastating innocence, asked, "Mom, what about the milk for little brother?" The mother bent down to her, caressed her blonde hair, and whispered something that Carlos couldn't hear, but it made the little girl smile. Carlos, paralyzed, watched as the mother and her daughters left the supermarket. The mother carried the crying baby while the girl skipped, unaware of the tragedy that had just occurred. For the first time in years, Carlos felt something he had never experienced. Shame. Not the social shame of being associated with something unpleasant, but moral shame. The kind of shame one feels when realizing they have lived in a bubble completely disconnected from reality. When the woman left the supermarket, Carlos stayed there, among the aisles, feeling that his business success had been built on the suffering of families like hers. That night, in his perfectly climate-controlled and silent villa, Carlos couldn't eat dinner. He couldn't stop thinking about the baby's cries, the little girl's innocent question, and the mother's gaze, who had been forced to choose between feeding her child or buying diapers to prevent irritation. For the first time in 20 years of his career, the numbers on his reports were no longer abstract figures, but the reflection of real human lives. Families who struggled every day against poverty while he optimized profits. The days following that experience were a whirlwind of emotions and reflections for Carlos. He could no longer focus on financial reports or company meetings. The image of the mother returning the milk haunted him, transforming every business decision into a moral dilemma. While the executives discussed the price increase for the next quarter, Carlos saw the face of the little girl asking about the milk for her little brother. He was determined to change something, though he didn't know how. He decided to return to the Vallecas supermarket, but this time not as an executive, but as an observer, to learn more about the reality he had ignored for so long. He dressed simply, jeans, a hoodie, sunglasses, and a cap. He spent hours walking through the aisles, studying the customers' behaviors, observing everything from a completely different perspective. What he saw left him shocked. Mothers counting every cent before putting something in their cart. Elderly people stopping for long minutes to compare prices before choosing the cheapest product. Entire families splitting up down the aisles to save time and find the best deals. These people were not just shopping, they were fighting every day against the humiliation of poverty. The supermarket, which had been designed to maximize consumption, had become a battlefield of survival. The next day he saw the same woman. Again, this time she was alone. She seemed to have left her children at home and carried a handwritten shopping list on a crumpled piece of paper. He followed her from a distance, observing how she moved through the supermarket with quick and determined steps. She only picked up what was on sale or the cheapest items, carefully monitoring each price with the obsessive attention of someone who could not afford to make a single mistake. At the checkout, the woman paid for 9 items: pasta, rice, milk, bread, a pack of sausages, discounted bananas, detergent, diapers, and a pack of children's paracetamol. The total was €23.40. This time she had the exact amount, which she counted twice before handing it over to the cashier with a shy smile of triumph. Carlos followed her outside the supermarket, keeping his distance, and saw her walk for 15 minutes until she reached a social housing block. The building was from the 70s, with crumbling walls and windows repaired with duct tape. The woman climbed 5 floors on foot because the elevator was broken. The shopping bags visibly weighed down her thin arms. That same night, Carlos called the personnel manager of the Vallecas supermarket and requested information about the employees and the social situation of the neighborhood. He wanted to understand the environment better. What he discovered hit him like a punch to the stomach. 40% of the families in the area were living below the poverty line. Youth unemployment exceeded 35%, and many of the most loyal customers were people struggling to get the basics. The statistics not only showed low profitability but also human pain that Carlos had never been aware of. The personnel director, thinking that Carlos was evaluating the possibility of closing the supermarket, began listing the store's problems: low margins, customers with limited purchasing power, and increasing thefts. But Carlos stopped him, realizing something important. He had created a system that saw poverty as a problem to be solved by closing stores, instead of lowering prices, to help the people who needed it the most. That night, in his quiet villa, Carlos made a decision that would change everything. He called his assistant and asked him to gather all possible data on stores in low-income neighborhoods. He wanted precise information. How many families depended on their supermarkets? What percentage of their income was spent on essential products? How many children went to bed without dinner because their parents couldn't complete their purchases? The data he received in the following days was devastating. In stores located in poor neighborhoods, profit margins on baby products were twice as high as the European average. A family with 2 young children spent an average of €150 per month just on milk, diapers, and baby food. Carlos realized that his success had in fact been the reflection of the suffering of many families. Every time he raised prices to improve margins, he had condemned many of them to choose between essentials: babies who couldn't be fed, mothers who couldn't buy diapers. The pain was real and he had contributed to it. He decided that his company would change. The third time he returned to the Vallecas supermarket, Carlos already had a clear idea of what he needed to do. He called an emergency meeting with all the staff at the supermarket and announced something revolutionary. All baby products would be sold at cost price, with no profit margin. Additionally, an anonymous family fund would be created so that mothers who couldn't complete their purchase could access it without shame. When the store manager expressed concern about profitability, Carlos looked him in the eye and said, "Well, it's time." The following days were crucial. The legal team structured the No Child Without Milk program, and the Vallecas supermarket began implementing the new policies. The first change was quickly noticed. The mother who had returned the milk the previous week returned to the supermarket, this time unaware of the changes. At the checkout, the total was halved. Thinking it was an error, the cashier explained the new business program. The woman broke down in tears of gratitude. For the first time in months, she could buy everything she needed without having to choose between essential products. The news of the new policy spread quickly through the neighborhood. Families who had once been ashamed to shop at that supermarket now saw it as a place where they could be treated with dignity. The supermarket was filled with customers who even came from other neighborhoods, and sales increased by 40% in just 2 weeks. Families who had saved on milk and diapers began to spend money on other products. The success was as unexpected as it was resounding. Convinced that his model could work nationally, Carlos called a meeting with the company's board of directors. He presented the revolution of dignity and proposed extending the program to all supermarkets in the chain, offering essential products at cost price. The reaction was devastating. The financial director calculated a 60% reduction in profits. Some board members spoke of unfair competition, while others threatened to resign. But Carlos had something that the others didn't: the data from the Vallecas supermarket. The model was working, and not only that, it was creating loyalty that went beyond numbers. The vote was close. 6 members voted against, 5 in favor, and 1 abstained. As the majority shareholder, Carlos decided to proceed with his proposal, despite the opposition. The implementation of the revolution of dignity transformed the public perception of his company. The media began to tell stories of families saved from food poverty thanks to his programs. The deepest impact was the one Carlos himself experienced. The man who had optimized profits throughout his career found a new satisfaction in seeing the smiles of mothers and children who no longer had to choose between eating and surviving. Carlos no longer went to his supermarkets just to see the numbers. Now, he visited the stores to listen to the customers' stories and understand their needs. The transformation was real. Carlos sold his villa, liquidated his art collection, and gave up his private jet. But every sacrifice seemed small compared to the joy of seeing mothers smiling and children fed. The revolution of dignity had begun.